So Barry Gold, we knew him when he was with the Moore Foundation and funded a lot of our support regionally on ocean planning. I'll say that the Moore Foundation never funded the ocean SAM, but we did fund the regional effort, which we really, really appreciated. Now Barry has moved as the director of the Walton Family Foundation Environmental Program and actually won the National Champion of the Ocean for your support on championing ocean policy. So Barry, I'd like to...
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. And apologies for being late. We'll have to blame that on American Airlines. I've spent a great deal of time talking to fishermen on the water, residents in coastal communities, officials in state and national capitals, recreational fishermen and seafood industry executives. And those conservations have convinced me and us at the Walton Family Foundation that we can make fishing the sustainability success story of the 21st century. As most of you know, here in Rhode Island, many of our fisheries, both nationally and internationally, are overfished. And we believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, we can turn that around. So, as Jen said, I head the environment program at the Walton Family Foundation, where we have 4 initiatives, including our Oceans Initiative, which, as I just said, is committed to ending overfishing, improving ocean health, and preserving coastal livelihoods. And I think it's important that I mention the livelihoods piece, because for us, we view people as integral to the environment. So we put people as part of the environment, not separate from the environment. So all of our work, and you'll see the countries that we've chosen to work in, including the United States, it's both to get to a healthy environment, but also healthy communities, and we believe those healthy ecosystems will support those communities. We work in 5 countries to promote seafood sustainability. We work in the United States, Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Indonesia. And we see the U.S. as critical to our work internationally, because the U.S. currently is a leader in good fisheries management. And our grantees are working hard to protect the sustainable seafood gains that we've made over the past 2 decades, while Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Indonesia illustrate the challenges and potential for the future of sustainable seafood. In 2017, we invested almost $38 million in our oceans work spread over 5 countries. We do this in partnership. The foundation, we're the enablers, but without partners, our work won't happen. So we partner with fishermen, with country, industry, and community leaders to put in place science-based and common sense policies and practices for fisheries. To secure healthy, sustainable fisheries, we focus on policy changes, innovations in fisheries management, and market signals. Important to us to get this to be durable is that the market demand and support sustainability and reward fishermen for engaging in sustainable practices. So our grantees work to empower and incentivize fishermen and communities to fish smarter, not harder, and seek to connect healthy fisheries with the financial benefits of sustainable fishing. Our current work is focused on, as I said, is focused on the United States, Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Indonesia. These countries have great potential to demonstrate fisheries recovery, both for the large-scale industrial fisheries as well as the small-scale artisanal fisheries over the next 5 to 10 years. Together, they account for almost 25% of global fisheries harvest, and they represent several biologically significant marine ecosystems. They're home to millions of small-scale fishermen, and the economic benefits of rebuilding and sustainably managing these fisheries can be measured in the billions of dollars. We also work on the demand side, as I said, and our demand side countries are the US, Japan, and Spain, which import nearly 2/3 of the world's globally traded seafood products. The US, Japan, and Spain buy more than $3.6 billion a year in seafood exports from Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Indonesia. Hence, you see the yin and yang of the countries that we work in, the producers and the consumers. Our approach aims to encourage industry to make investments in sustainable fisheries that raise incomes and improve the quality of life for individual fishermen and fishing communities in these countries. Our work in the U.S. is intended to protect the gains we've made, and over the past 20 years, the U.S. has made important progress toward ensuring the long-term health of U.S. fish populations and the fishing communities that depend on them. My communications guy let me put up one semi-technical slide instead of just pretty pictures. And this is a slide that I first saw in the U.S. Ocean Commission's report back in 2000. And I think what's critical about it is to get us all to understand that fish aren't just important as consumers, but they structure the whole marine ecosystem. So whatever we do to fish in terms of affecting the scale of their populations, we're doing to the whole ecosystem. And then that comes back, there's a feedback loop that then leads to the overall health of the oceans. In 2018, the number of species on the overfished list for the U.S. dropped from 45 to 35, an all-time low. It's a huge accomplishment for the seafood industry and for the conservation community working together. Previously depleted stocks, such as the Gulf of Mexico gag grouper and the Gulf of Maine butterfish, for example, have come back to healthy levels. And in the Gulf of Mexico, we have a redfish population that's recovering so much, it's leading to this conundrum of overfishing on the recreational community and a challenge to our healthy fish populations. Recovered fisheries now across the U.S. now support thriving commercial and recreational fishing businesses, including those in Rhode Island. I think it's important to recognize Rhode Island for the credit it's made in being a leader in sustainable fisheries. Rhode Island's been a leader in the national movement towards sustainable seafood. The state has led the way on establishing catch years, implementing marine spatial planning, as you heard Jen mention earlier, and advancing cooperative research. On an individual level, Chris Brown, who is here today, I believe, is an example of someone who's driving innovation in the fishing sector here in Rhode Island. We have learned that changes that come from and are driven by local leaders like Chris are the kind of changes that are durable and make a difference. I also want to recognize Senator Whitehouse for his continued leadership and commitment to our oceans. He plays a critical role in Congress as a champion. Any of those of you who have not watched his weekly speech on oceans, I encourage you to do it. You're up to how many now? 210. Remarkable. And he does it in the face of lots of challenges in that body. And speaking of challenges, you know, we've made great strides in recovering fisheries and rebuilding fisheries, but we're also facing a lot of new challenges. Our oceans are impacted by changing climate, and the Gulf of Maine is ground zero for the ways climate change is affecting our oceans. Fish populations are moving, so we now have fishermen from North Carolina coming up to fish in New England waters for fish that their management council manages, not the New England Management Council. That's a pretty long distance for those fish to have migrated already. Sea level is rising, surface temperatures are increasing, oceans are acidifying, and currents are changing course. So all of these things are going to impact the way we manage fisheries. At the same time, we have new and emerging uses that also create challenges to the health of our oceans. We've got renewable energy, like wind energy, the growth of aquaculture, and we're going to have to figure out how we avoid competition between these new and emerging uses, and how, in Jane Lubchenco's words, we use the oceans but don't use them up. We're also still struggling a great deal with traceability. Just a few weeks ago, the Associated Press published an investigation that showed that one of the largest and fastest growing sustainable seafood distributors was lying about its catch and was labeling species that were farmed, out of season, or illegal as wild, domestic, and traceable. Those traceability problems in the U.S. reflect the global struggle we're facing, with 30% of all catch coming from illegal sources. And finally, we're currently facing legislative challenges to the success of the sustainable fishing movement. A big part of the success we've seen in the U.S. in reviving our fisheries is due to the Magnuson-Stevens Act, our landmark fishery management law that enables us to better trace where our seafood comes from and monitor the health of our fish stocks. The Magnuson-Stevens Act is the reason that fisheries management decisions, including annual catch limits, must be science-based. It's why we've reduced bycatch, the accidental taking and often wasting of undesired or protected species that play an important role in the ecosystem. Magnuson-Stevens also protects essential fish habitats, including the seagrasses and reefs that are the spawning and nursery grounds for the fish we harvest. As a result of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, over the past 10 years, despite pollution and the impacts of climate change, our fisheries are far healthier than they would be without those essential provisions. Despite the strides made because of MSA, this cornerstone of sustainable fishing is being challenged. The reauthorization debates in Congress today pose a serious threat to the core conservation elements of the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and with it, the future health of our fisheries. There are legislative proposals under serious consideration that would undermine our most effective conservation tools, weaken the use of data in fishery management, and put local businesses and coastal communities at risk. We believe that any reauthorization should protect and build upon the progress we've made, not undermine it. We want to see Congress take this opportunity to improve science-based assessments, catch accounting, and data management. We're supporting innovations in electronic monitoring to help advance that. These are things that are essential to healthier oceans and a healthier seafood industry. So we have a lot of challenges to tackle, but as I said at the opening, based on all of the conversations I've had over the last 5 to 10 years, I really believe we can do it. I've learned over the past few decades that those who are closest to the challenges are often closest to its solution. That's why it's critical that fishing communities, business owners, and political leaders in places like Rhode Island, which has been a pioneer and a driver of innovation in ocean sustainability, continue to champion strong policies that will help us build on the successes we've achieved rather than taking big steps backward. The Walton Family Foundation is committed to supporting efforts to advance the sustainability movement and protect the landmark laws that have helped get us where we are today. We're eager to work in partnership with people like you in this room who can help champion solutions that lead to healthy oceans in the U.S. and abroad and end overfishing for good. Thank you.
So again, we're going to do some Q&A. Are there any specific questions for Barry? We have Jen. We have Jen West from the NEARS, the Narragansett Bay National Estuary Research Reserve.
Thanks, Jen, and thanks, Barry, for that presentation. I was wondering if you could give an example or two of the incentives or awards that are given to fishermen who practice sustainable fishing methods.
Yeah, so the incentives typically come, what we work on, we've helped to create the Marine Stewardship Council certification, and we're helping a lot of the companies from Unilever to Safeway to Hy-Vee procure, develop policies where they're seeking to procure sustainable seafood. So the incentive comes in form of either market access or a price, and that's especially true when under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, fishermen are allowed to put in a catch share so that they're given an allocation of the annual catch limit, and they're allowed to fish it whenever they want when the market conditions are better. So it's an economic incentive of that nature.
Jonathan Stone, Save the Bay.
Barry, thanks for the great presentation. Rhode Island has worked very hard at a state level to assert leadership in protecting important forage species, notably Atlantic menhaden, which, and as you're well aware, the issue of protecting these sort of core species that are at the bottom of the food web influence the productivity, the whole ecosystem, and benefit many other species that are much greater commercial value. My question is, ecosystem-based management is kind of a new way of thinking about how to set catch limits and manage particular species. And I'd like your perspective on the degree to which this way of thinking about how we protect particular species is being embraced regionally, nationally, and how you think about it as a methodology for ocean sustainability.
I think ecosystem-based management is a critical tool. And when I was at the Packard Foundation, which was, I've been at 3 foundations, so when I was at the Packard Foundation, before the Moore Foundation, I led the effort to get scientists on board to develop and sign a consensus statement advancing ecosystem-based fisheries management as an approach for managing our fisheries. I think it's more complicated, right, than single species management. We don't yet have all of the models and tools in place and all of the data. I think we need to work towards that. I think we need to recognize the value of forage fish. And I think it's important that we set limits. There was a time when we thought the pressure on forage fish species, whether it was menhaden or anchoveta, was coming from the fish meal industry, and we could just, reduce that pressure that way. I think what we've now learned is there's going to be a market and demand for those species, whether it's nutraceuticals for vitamin E, or it's chicken feed, or it's fish meal, and so we just have to manage those directly. There are new modeling tools out there that people are developing to try to do multi-species management, and but I have not been close enough to tell you how it's being embraced here regionally. I was working a lot on it on the Pacific coast, and I know we had invested a lot in the multi-species models, Atlantis and others out there, to try to get it embraced and adopted, but I really don't know the status of it here on the East Coast.
Chris Brown?
Hey bud, how you doing? Well, thanks for making the trip. To the young lady's inquiry as to how you reward or sponsor good practices, I will say that one of the best ways that you do it is you fund community-based organizations such as one of the ones that I'm the president of, the Seafood Harvesters of America. We're an organization of fishermen from Alaska to Maine who have risen out of the ashes of overfishing with an evolved perspective. It gives us an opportunity to gather momentum and get our message across in Congress. So by facilitating our desires, our wishes, and our political statements, we amplify a really strong message. And I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thanks, Chris.
We live in a society that people have called post-truth. And we see it in climate, we see it in fisheries, where truth and data don't seem to matter anymore. How is that affecting your work?
It's actually broadened some of the grant making that we do. We're now we're making some grants to the Union of Concerned Scientists, who have a program that's about protecting science. We've engaged in some work with the American Association for the Advancement of Science around support for science and protecting science against attacks. We funded, well, not in this position, but I previously worked in California to create something called the California Council on Science and Technology, where we fund that group, the Moore Foundation, a group of other funders, placed 10 PhD level scientists and engineers every year in the state legislature as fellows to provide advice to the members. It's now in its 10th year, and that program is the highest rated program by the Speaker in the California state legislature, and the demand for fellows is high. So I think the issue is we have to get the science out there. We have to protect and defend it. We have to help scientists become better communicators. But we also have to allow policymakers to do their job. And that is, the science can present an option, but the policymaker's decision is to choose where they're going to do that balancing, right? We can tell someone, if you allow 10 pounds of pollution, it's going to have this impact, and if you allow 5 pounds of pollution, it's going to have a different impact. And there could be some cost-benefit analysis there where the politician is going to make a choice, or the decision maker is going to make a choice. So I think we have to respect the role of policymakers, at the same time ensuring that they have credible and sound science to make those judgments on.